Hello and welcome to the Last Wicket. I'm your host, Benny. Thank you for joining us. And I'm joined as always by my co-host, Mike. Hey, Mike.
Hey Benny,
And we have our returning champion, Ben Brettell, back on the podcast. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm really good, thanks, Benny. Yeah, it's great to be back and good to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you and talk to you as always. How are you occupying your cricket watching time, Ben? I know the IPL is on, but is there any, I know the county cricket is going on. Are you following that as well?
Been keeping an eye on the county championship. Yeah, my team is Somerset, and we're actually doing
Okay.
quite well so
That's
far.
good.
I think it's two wins and a draw so far, so top of the table. So yeah, very happy about that. I actually had the county cricket on YouTube because all the games are streamed live on YouTube, and the IPL on
Hmm.
at the same time last week. So I was dual screening for a bit.
That is a hard difference. I'm pretty sure that the tempo and the vibes in county cricket is right now very different from what's going on in the IPL. So how are you as a viewer who's following both of them simultaneously? How do you feel about that?
There's definitely a difference in tempo between those two things and the crowd and the excitement and the
Yeah.
razzmatazz. I think, this particularly this time of year, a Red Bull game at Taunton, there might be, three or four hundred people in if you're lucky, and most of them are doing the
Mhm.
crossword or asleep. It's kind of
That actually
cool.
sounds like the perfect cricket watching experience,
I
personally.
I
But
absolutely love it. But I think one of cricket's great strengths is the variety in it and the fact that
right,
there's
I agree.
room for both of those things, and we love it all.
Yeah. Let's talk about very quickly before we get to the main topic of this episode. Let's talk about something that we can all uh, kind of be familiar with, the IPL. You being a IPL fan as well, what is your take on how everything has been shaping up so far?
I absolutely love the IPL. It's one of my favorite events of the year. Always look forward to it. I think this year's been really absorbing, and there's been some pretty insane moments as well. I think overall it seems like the batting has just been taken to another level again, to the point
Yes.
where the only way to win consistently is to absolutely obliterate it from ball one. I noticed that the
Hmm.
four teams at the top of the table at halfway are also the top four teams by number of sixes hit, and
Right.
that's not a coincidence. I think historically, even last year, there's been room for a slightly more traditional approach. Basically the Gujarat or the CSK approach of starting in a slightly more circumspect manner and then a fast finish if you've got wickets in hand. But this year it seems like you just can't win doing that. You need a Suryavanshi or a Arya or a Abhishek to just strike at 200 from ball one.
Right.
Like I'm a little bit sad about that because I think the game that's just finished, the LSG and KKR, a low scoring thriller, is I think always the most exciting game.
Oh yeah. That
Um,
that's my kind of game rather than the high scoring
yeah, I mean
matches
that
like
said,
that.
the chase yesterday that Punjab pulled off was insane, and that was good to watch too. But I think again, variety is the spice of life. If it's all 200 odd plays 200 odd, then it gets a bit
Yeah.
boring.
Who's your team? Which team are you supporting?
I'm supporting Punjab, same as last year.
Okay.
Partly for financial reasons. I like them as a team. I think they're really well balanced. Um, I think Ponting's doing a good job. I
Yeah.
like the fact that they're not just made up of kind of big name stars,
Right.
although many of them will be in the future, I think. And yeah, talking about the betting, I backed them last year, and I backed them again this year at 8-1 pre-tournament, and I see they're now 2-1 favourites, and yeah, I think they should have
Right.
been a much shorter price from the start. But yeah, so that's my team. I like them, but it's also slightly financially driven.
No, but I honestly think this is their best chance in forever They just look well-rounded, well-led, seem to have covered all their bases, and I'm honestly they are a good even for a neutral fan. Um, especially when my team is just terrible at the moment. They're a very good team to back, and I really hope they go all the way this year to win. So, yeah.
Me
I,
too.
I would I would agree. I think like they're one a good team to watch, but also just I mean I think it's time like all the franchises that haven't won in 19 years finally catch up. So this is as good as time as any for Punjab Kings for sure. Hopefully Delhi
yeah.
will fix that record. I have no hope with Lucknow and
No,
the way things
that'll
are
probably
going,
be a few years for
but
Delhi, I feel. They have some catching
probably.
up to do.
I think the other thing I've picked up on as well is just that this year the gap between the good teams and the bad teams looks bigger.
Yes. It
You
definitely
know,
looks like a table of two halves, like just where they are as a team, they just feel like on two different levels right now.
yeah. I mean, LSG and KKR have both been terrible, and today it was just like, yeah, both of those teams were desperate to lose that game, and it was
Yeah.
who tried hardest. But I think
Yes.
that and a big big surprise is that you can probably include Mumbai Indians in that list of terrible. Well, they do tend to finish better
Yes.
than they start, but they've been awful so far.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm curious to see how it all shapes up. We're already halfway done. It already feels like it's been a long time since the tournament has been going on, but it always happens that way every year. But yes, it is definitely shaping up to be an intriguing finish to the tournament as it stands now with the teams that are most likely to make it to the playoffs and stuff. It just looks like it's just going to be the most exciting teams and the strongest teams on paper. So I'm looking forward to how it's all going to end. But yeah, let's get into our big discussion for this episode.
All right, I'll take over. So, Ben, you already touched on it. You mentioned Punjab Kings is was your pre-tournament bet, and that's really what we wanted to talk about, just betting on cricket. I also read your blog around this, and obviously this is something that you focus on quite a bit. So, yeah, I guess I'll just open the floor and ask you to educate us.
Yeah, I think so. I just to start with wanted to take a step back from cricket slightly and just give some background. My approach to betting on cricket is very much shaped by my approach to betting in general. I've been betting on sports fairly seriously for well, probably close to 20 years now, and with quite a bit of success. It has provided a second income stream in many years. So I've been doing it for a while, and with a reasonable amount of success. And the key to my approach is just to try and be completely rational and bring absolutely no emotion to the table at all. So there's no kind of betting on your favorite team or any sentimental bets. No chasing losses when you're losing or increasing stakes when you're winning. It's purely, the minute you bring emotion, you're in trouble. So it's kind of rational decisions rule. And I think the key thing to realize is that betting really comes down to just maths, right? So you all you're looking for is situations where the odds don't reflect the true chance of something happening, and obviously that takes a bit of expertise to know what the true chance is or be able to estimate well the true chance of something happening. And then when you see the odds are out of line with what you think the chance is, then that's when you bet. And the more out of line the odds are, the bigger your stake, which means that actually this is a sort of common misconception with betting that people think it's about backing winners, but it's not really true. It's you're not really focused on the results at all. You're focused on having the right bets at the right prices, and then you kind of let the results look after themselves. Does that make sense?
It does, and I guess what I was gonna say is the way you described it almost makes me feel like, I've played a lot of poker, so it almost reminds me of that mindset. You're playing your cards and playing, not worrying too much about, hey, how does the opponent play and things like, I mean, obviously in poker you bluff, and so there's those aspects as well. Um, but essentially, the idea is to sort of look at the odds, and you're like, well, these are much better odds than what I had expected, and then trying to take a decision. Can you like make that real for us with an example? And I think Punjab Kings might be the perfect one to look at considering what you just mentioned.
I think there's two examples that I often use to explain this. One is really simple. Just imagine that you're betting on the toss of a coin. So the true chance of it coming up heads is 50-50, right? So the odds should be evens. If I offered you odds of 6-4 on a head coming up, well, that's 2.5 in decimal odds about a head, you should snap my hand off, right? Because you know there's value in that price. Now, if it comes up tails, that doesn't mean it was a bad bet. It just means that the result didn't go your way. You should have that bet again and again and again because you're betting something at odds that imply the chance is 40% when it's you know that it's 50%. And if you make that bet 1,000 times, you'll make a lot of money. So
Right.
that's the really simple example that I use. And the other one is just from investing, right? So we all know that you think of like Apple or Amazon, we all know that they're hugely successful companies, but winners in the stock market, if you like. But does that mean you should go out and buy Apple stock when the market opens tomorrow? The answer to that is it depends on the price. It's not good, just because it's a great company doesn't mean you should buy the shares at the current price. If you overpay for a stock, the company could be super successful over the next 5 years and you don't make any money because you paid too
Right.
high a price to start with. And it's the same in betting. And in the Punjab Kings example, when I looked at that market, I thought they should be probably joint favourites at around 4-1. So when the odds came out and they were 8-1, I thought that's an opportunity, and that's exactly the type of opportunity you're looking for.
And 8-1 meaning roughly, let's say 13% chance is what the market gave Punjab Kings to win it all. I would agree
Yeah,
to your
8-1 is a
assessment.
one in nine chance.
1 and 9. Okay. So about,
So
yeah, 12,
11,
11, 12%. Yeah.
11%. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas I thought
And
the chances were closer to 4-1, which would be 20%.
right, considering they looked like one of at least the top three teams, if not the top two. The way they've shaped up in general to this season, what they've done last season, all of that, it makes a lot of sense that you would back them as a top team. Um, how do you take that? Like, I think from a season perspective, that makes a lot of sense. But the one other thing about cricket and particularly T20 cricket is the odds within each game vary so much. Each venue is different. A team like Punjab, obviously, they've been unbeaten so far, but even they will drop 2, 3 games every season. So,
Hmm.
how do you look at it from a game to game perspective?
I think game to game is probably where, and even within the game is probably where there are even more opportunities where you can spot where a price looks wrong because the market often overreacts to developments within a game or to, say, for example, team news or even just sort of recency bias, so previous recent results. So it's interesting you mentioned the venue because that's the first thing I tend to look at. So look at the historic scoring rates at a venue, um, and also look at whether there's a bias towards setting or chasing a total, and particularly filter for the type of game, so if it's a day game or a day night game or a night game, because the dew can have more of an impact when the game's
Right,
later in the day. So looking at both of those things, if you look at those two factors, that gives me an idea of what a par score might look like, and also whether it's better to bat first or bat second, and how strong that bias is. And then I look at the form of the teams and their relative strengths and weaknesses, and any kind of key matchups that I think might come into play. And then finally, once I've made an assessment of the game, then I look at the odds. Because I think
gotcha.
if you look at the odds first, then sometimes it can kind of
You work your
affect
way into
it
making sense,
affects
making that
it affects
sense.
your judgment, and you can start kind
Yeah.
of you're starting with a price and working out whether that's right or not. Whereas I prefer to make my own assessment and then compare it with the odds, and sometimes that highlights more starkly any differences.
That's really interesting. I think that's the piece that I also do options on stocks, and again, not related to cricket, but when I do that, that's what I look at always. I'm always looking at the price and I'm like, does that make sense? And so, to your point, I sort of back into it and then figure out if it makes sense rather than doing my own math. You mentioned the things within a game as well. So let's talk about that as well. So obviously there's betting on the outcome of, a game, a season, as we've talked about already. What are the other things that you can bet on in terms of within a game? Is it power play score or things like that? Also, things that are pretty commonly bet on.
You can bet on pretty much anything within a game from, obviously the outright result, but from, the runs scored or wickets taken by a particular player. You can even bet on the runs that will be scored off a specific delivery. There's a huge number of markets within any particular game. The things that I tend to focus on, apart from the outright winner, are the highest power play score, because I think that's quite an easy one to make a good assessment of. You look at the strike rates of the top three, look at how many wickets the opening bowlers tend to take and their economy rates. You look at any sort of historical matchups, and then you can often work out which team will win the first 6 overs, and then compare that with the prices. Obviously, a similar one is which team hits the most sixes. That's a that's a similar one. First innings runs, I like that market. So the market sets a line. So where that market settles is where the prediction is. So say that line is 185 and a half, then you can bet either higher or lower on that line. Um,
Okay, so
I,
that's
I
not
find,
trying to specify the runs that'll be scored. It's more, will it be higher or lower than the set
yeah,
mark,
will it
set
be higher
threshold?
or lower than a set line? And then that line actually
Got it.
moves. That line will move during the game as well. So you can bet that during the game. But I think that's a good one because that you can really factor in conditions, and if you've got a good idea of how the pitch might play, and you can go into quite a bit of detail with this. At certain grounds, there's some strips that are more bowler friendly or batsman friendly, depending on where they are on the wicket, and red soil or black soil, or a mixed between the two. So yeah, when you factor all that in, often the market hasn't quite factored it all in properly, and you can spot opportunities there. So yeah, those are my, I guess, my favorite ones. I don't tend to do player bets too often because I think it's I think they're more for people who want like a fun bet of, this player is going to top score in this
Right.
in this match, or in this innings, or this player is going to score more than 30 runs, or this player is going to get 100. That feels to me like it's harder to have an edge in those markets.
I think it also requires some luck, like for example, KL Rahul obviously did amazing just yesterday, scoring 152, but he had a couple of lives. So like there's a lot that has to go right for some of that to come off as compared to what you mentioned, betting on, I think the chance of Punjab Kings scoring more in the power play is higher because, well, they're just a lot more attacking than, Delhi Capitals as an example. So
Yeah,
so I think that way the sense I get how you're getting to that logic of um, let's look at the historic data, let's look at what the trends are, and then make a decision whether it's worth betting. Um, do you?
yeah.
I'm also curious. Like, do you use any tools, or have you since you've been betting for so long, have you just had your own like spreadsheets or something to do calculations and get an idea?
Yeah, I keep my own spreadsheets, and yeah, update them with the data from ESPN Quick Info and Quick Metric and all those other sites. It's sometimes difficult to piece
Yeah.
together all the data, but yeah, I tend to start with that and then do my own analysis for each match and for each tournament. And yeah, back to tournament markets. I do really like some of the more obscure tournament markets, not just like India are going to win the World Cup, but some of the slightly more detailed markets. Like I had a successful bet recently was on the World Cup of India to hit most sixes in the World Cup more than any other team. The market priced them at 7-4, which was ridiculously high. I think India were hitting a six every 11 balls during that recent, the most recent cycle. I thought the chance of them hitting more sixes than any other team was closer to kind of 70 or 80% rather than the 30 odd percent implied by the odds. So, and they won easily. I think they scored half as many sixes again as the next team.
Gotcha.
So Ben,
Um,
I have I don't really have any knowledge about betting in general, sports betting, and definitely not cricket betting. So I'm going to ask questions which are going to sound really dumb. So bear with me. So first question that I want to ask is, have you considered using, especially in today's age, considered using AI to help determine essentially what bets you're going to take on?
I find that AI in general, AI is a lot better at words than it is at maths.
Hmm.
Is the first thing I would say. Um, I have experimented with trying to put prompts into AI related to betting and also to investing, actually. Um, and I'm not yet convinced that it's any good.
Okay. But it's
Um,
probably going to get there soon, the
as
way we're going.
I think it's only as good as AI is still only as good as the person driving it at the moment. So
Hmm.
it's what prompts you put in, and you'd have to put in an awful lot of data and then trust it to analyze it properly. And I'm not saying it won't get there, but
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that as soon as bettors start using it, I would imagine the bookmakers would also start using it
Yeah.
if
Probably
they're
will
not
drive
already
more regulation
if they're
towards it
not
too.
if they're not already.
Yeah.
Um, and given that you're trying to find an edge where you think the price is wrong, if that
Hmm.
price is set by AI and then you're asking AI whether the price is right, it's hard to work out whether I think it's like yeah, and I think a lot of the prices are set. So just going back a couple of steps here, prices in a market are they're initially set by a bookmaker, often using an algorithm, and then they're shaped by weight of money in the market, supply and demand. So they'll move according to supply and demand. So what you're looking for already there is like when a bookmaker prices a market for the first time, that's done by an algorithm. So you're looking for your human knowledge and intuition and the sum total of all the data you've analyzed and all the information you have being better than their algorithm.
Right.
And then as the price moves, when money comes into the market, you're looking for your knowledge and your data and your analysis being better than everyone else's. So
I think I think the supply demand piece also really adds to it because let's say if everybody's using AI and everybody's, okay at using it, let's say they are not great prompt engineers or whatever the right word is, and they're just searching, the same way. They're all getting the same results and all betting on a certain way. That itself will change the supply and demand and the odds right then and there. So it's going to be harder to track anyways. Like it will just depend on what entry point you're getting into.
I think yeah, and it might end up creating opportunities in that because if everyone's using the same tools, it's going to lead to that herd mentality where everybody's piling into potentially the wrong thing at the wrong price, and then you can pick off the opportunities when you're convinced they're wrong. Maybe means that there are fewer opportunities, but when they arise, they'll be bigger. I think it's the same in investing. I think that a lot
Yeah.
of stuff. a lot of stock prices, certainly now in the short term, are driven by algorithmic trading and high frequency trading that is largely not driven by humans. But in the long run, it's more to do with fundamentals, and I think betting is somewhat analogous to that. So yeah,
The
that
one
wasn't a silly question at all, Benny. Good question.
Listen,
the
somebody's thinking of it. Okay.
the one thing I was gonna also touch on is it sounds like you've been betting for a number of years, and I also just, searching around the regulations that different countries have on sports betting and cricket betting in particular. Sounds like the UK does have a fully legal regulated system, and a pretty good market as well. Um, I guess what are your thoughts on just how big that betting market is, and what have you heard in your journey as, are you seeing other countries also bet a lot, or is it pretty much at least in cricket, very much a UK driven activity?
I mean, I'm obviously based in the UK and completely focused on the UK in terms of where I can where I can bet. The market's huge here and quite liquid. Like I checked about halfway through the LSG KKR game today, and that had just on the outright result market had over £100 million matched on it on Betfair. So just one platform on one
Right.
game that's happening in India. Um, yeah, so it's a very developed market in the UK. It's regulated and licensed. I think we'll maybe come on to this later, but there's probably arguments for more regulation in some areas. I know betting is huge in India despite it being illegal, and I think that's where it gets into slightly more dangerous territory, if you like.
Yeah.
You are unlicensed, unregulated operators who may also tend to be somewhat unscrupulous given they're making their money through an illegal activity and then they're mixed up in all kinds of other shady and illegal activities. And it's easy to then see how that leads to match fixing, for example, or individual bettors running into difficulties like, running up debts to, they can't pay back to somebody who you wouldn't want to owe money to and all that kind of unpleasantness. So I think, yeah, it's interesting that I would say prohibition doesn't really work 'cause it just sort of drives it underground, and then you get all the other nefarious activities that go with that.
Yeah, that definitely is a piece that I've, been thinking about as I was preparing for this topic, because looking at the sort of the regulations in different countries, it sounds like Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand have legal betting, but it's limited. For example, I read in Australia there's no online betting, which didn't quite make sense to me in today's day and age. Um, then Sri Lanka, it looks like they legalized just 15 or 16 years back, 2010. India, to your point, pretty big market, although not legal. And there was a bit of a phase a couple of years ago where there was online gambling was probably a gray area. I can't say it was allowed at any point, but there were all these sites such as Dream 11, My Circle 11, which allowed you to bet money, pick players, and they kind of combined a fantasy
Hmm.
11 idea with money. So it wasn't just bragging rights that you would get, you would actually put money on it. And if your team did better, you could win a certain amount. So they kind of used that as a loophole of saying this is not betting, this is more a game of skill. But interestingly, in 2025, one of the courts overturned that, and Dream 11, which at that time was India's jersey
Hmm.
sponsor, had to suddenly shut operations and completely change their kind of figure out what they do next. Um, and then of course there's all the other many other countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, where it's completely legal. So it's really a very varied market in terms of cricket betting. And to your point, like UK definitely feels like the most settled and stable in terms of regulations and pathways to betting and just doing it regularly.
I definitely don't buy that whole kind of Dream 11 argument of kind of it's skill, it's not gambling, because betting is a game of skill, at least it is if you're doing it right. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that, like roulette is a game of pure chance, but
Right.
betting involves just as much skill and analysis as something like as Dream 11. So yeah, I think that was a loophole, and if the belief from the government or the regulator is that betting shouldn't take place, then also that shouldn't take place.
Yeah, and the reason it got particularly tricky is because it wasn't just that they were the sponsor of the Indian team. There were top Indian cricketers promoting things like that. I think Sourav Ganguly was promoting either My Circle 11 or maybe it was Gautam Gambhir promoting that. And they were doing it while they were part of BCCI
Mm.
or Gambhir was head coach. And of course, the Indian team was promoting a different a company doing the same thing. So it got very gray very quickly. Um, what I think the issue with it, like I mean, to your point, like of course there's you could bet with a certain set of skill, but I think where a lot of people enter this habit, and that's really my concern with betting in general, is it becomes addictive, and where a lot of people get in is just the excitement of, hey, I could win. It's not the logic that you're applying. It's not like, hey, I'm going to use this framework and then figure out if it's worth taking a chance. It's
It's more
more
like a gambling mentality.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, it's dangerous in the wrong hands, I think. As in the same way that something like alcohol is also dangerous
right.
in the wrong hands. I think that there are huge problems which come with gambling, and it's important that we don't minimize that issue. For many people, like speaking from the UK, most people who bet, it's a fun pastime. They'll have 10 or 20 pounds on an accumulator on the football on a Saturday, and it just kind of adds a little bit of spice to the entertainment when they're watching the games, and there's no harm in that. For a few people like myself, it's a serious pastime and involving plenty of study and knowledge and larger sums of money. And then for a few people, it's an addiction, and just like alcohol or drugs, it can really destroy lives. I've seen that firsthand. I think the betting industry in the UK needs to get much better at protecting these people. Back to what I was saying about maybe the cool, there's a case for increased regulation. And I think if you make it illegal, like it is in India, that's when that harm can get magnified and you get kind of more shady stuff happening. Yeah, do you remember the story a few years ago where an entirely fake league set up in India for illegal
Yes.
gambling. So they they got a cricket pitch in a little village in Gujarat somewhere, I think it was,
Mm.
and staged these games that were streamed on YouTube, and they were just entirely fixed. Like the umpires were telling the players what to do.
Yeah.
And most of the people betting on it were in Russia. It's just entirely bizarre, but really true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing that happens. I think that there's also an issue in the UK on the flip side of that where the bookmakers are very happy to take money from problem gamblers and people who they know will lose in the long run. But on the flip side of that, they very quickly restrict or close accounts that are held by people who are clearly using some degree of skill or knowledge or restraint, with the result that it's very hard for me and people like me to get bets on at all.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because I think the whole idea is I think that has been something that I've read across countries. I don't think it's a UK thing where these companies are definitely pushing this on people who they know are not, who are easily excitable, or like it's the same thing with lottery in the US, for example. You will see a lot more shops selling lottery tickets in a poor income neighborhood than a rich neighborhood, just because there's more chance of exciting people, getting them tempted to buy whatever, $1 a day, and then that ends up being becoming a habit. Um, and I think
Absolutely the
the
same with betting shops in the UK as well.
yeah, I mean, this is not a new business model anybody's found. This has been done over and over again. But I think the reason it gets way more dangerous now, in my mind, is the fact that it's so easy to access. Like, you can have an app on your phone, and that makes it doubly, triply as dangerous, because yeah, if it's a shop down the street, sure, I can control myself by not going in, or there's ways to restrict that. But having an app on my phone is so addictive that I personally, even for stocks, for example, not that I day trade or do anything like that where I trade every day, but it's just on my app, so I have a habit of clicking it every
Mm.
day, and I look at my portfolio for no reason. I really don't need to look at it more than once a
Same.
week, but it has just become a habit. It's easy to access, and a lot of people in my friend circle who have uh, you know heard about these apps, and I'll talk about the US as well. They've all agreed that yeah, this is incredibly addictive, and this is like people like you and I, the people who are not taking random bets, who are thinking through where they're betting and all of that. But even then, they agree that this is extremely addictive. And the other side of it is, you win a couple of games, you make, let's say, $50, you're not betting too much. Then you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to take a chance in the next four, but I've already won $50. So there's that aspect and that mentality that also comes in.
Yeah, it's like the apps, same as social media apps, they're designed by people whose job it is to make you spend as much time on that app as possible, and they're very, very good at it. So yeah, it's so much more accessible and much more dangerous now. Back when I started betting, it was a case of taking actual cash to an actual shop. And back in those
Right.
days, the shops weren't allowed to have windows because they didn't want people seeing inside and being corrupted by what was going on. So you had to it was this sort of darkened shop with kind of blacked out windows, and you had to go go inside, and then there's this kind of smoky world of people reading the Racing Post and putting bets on, in cash behind the counter. So there was some kind of, a barrier to it, whereas now it's just, on your phone 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and I think if I talk about the US, there's been two big companies that have come up in the recent years. One is Kalshi and the other one is Poly Markets. And both have, I started using Kalshi. I made some money on the IPL, I will admit. Not too much. It was like a few hundred dollars, um, but I think as I started looking at some of their activities in detail, it was nothing but shady. They allow people. Actually, Kaushi was the one trying to talk about how they are the responsible one, because they don't allow betting on the death of a foreign leader, for example. And I was like,
Mm.
that's a really low bar to set, firstly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, that was why they were saying they're the better of the two available in the US. And there was that. There was also just the fact that they were able to work around a lot of regulations. So it was very similar to the India method of calling it a game of skill and not gambling. They called it something else and not betting. I forget the terminology, but that's what they used. And probably the one difference that's there is, with Kalshi and Polymarket, is there's no there's like, you're not betting against a house. Essentially, it's not like poker or blackjack, rather, I should say. It's not like blackjack or roulette where you're betting against the house and there's a casino or some an organization that's supposed to pay you. You're betting against somebody else. And again, looking at the details, it was found there were about 700 accounts which won 90-95% of the money, and many of them happened right before many political events were happening, and things like that. Like an hour before the strike on
Mhm.
Iran, suddenly somebody bet a bunch and cleaned the house. So there was a lot of these shady business going on, and that's still happening. Of course, that nobody's stopping it, but clearly a lot of people are starting to talk about it. And then there is the whole bringing it back to cricket. You talked about, shady organizations starting and whatever franchise leagues, I'll say that in quotes, um, starting in India, for example. So that something similar was reported recently where they tried to do the same with women's cricket. They had an Agra Premier League, which was apparently held in Delhi, which is, not in Agra, but the location is probably the last problem here. The problem was they found a ground, had 6 games a day, and they were telecast on pretty ordinary production quality. And yeah, that was cast to half the world, and people were betting on that across the world, and included some Russian accounts and things like that. So again, things started getting really out of control. And I think this is where it stops being just the addiction habits. Like, to your point, of course, anything in the wrong hands can be dangerous, but it also starts to corrupt the game, or has potential to corrupt the game. Um, and that's probably something I want to talk about, because this is not cricket's only touch with betting, or any, these things. When we talk about spot fixing, that has happened in the last 15 years more than once, and has happened to international players. So this is not something that can be taken lightly. So I guess, having said all that, what are your thoughts around, um, yeah, the influence on the game and the power to corrupt it? Um, Maybe I'll start with that and get your thoughts.
It's interesting you mentioned Polymarket. I read an article on Polymarket the other day in the Financial Times, and it was yeah, that stat around, 70% of the accounts are losers and 30% of them are winners. And it's just kind of, money that's in the know taking money from people who don't know any better. And then the same thing happening with these, the fake leagues that we were just talking about. It's like the people who are it's essentially a scam that's designed to separate unwitting people from their money, which is obviously entirely unethical and should be legislated against. And I think, in terms of the integrity of the game of cricket, this whole match fixing thing has been, that's not a new thing either, is it? Back to the Hansi Cronje scandal where
Right.
I can't remember what he made out of that. It was famously a leather jacket and I think some money that this bookmaker offered him, and that was when he reached an agreement with I think it was Atherton, who was the England captain. It may have been before that, to declare both of them declare their first innings and just play a one innings game so that it wouldn't be a draw. And obviously somebody made a lot of money out of that. And then you've got the spot fixing stuff that's happened more recently. I think to me the first step is to have betting legal and regulated, just like alcohol, because I think prohibition just it sounds good, but you're just driving it underground, and then there's no visibility at all then. So more harm can be created, at least in a regulated market. You can look at the market and you can see when, most of this fixing stuff gets caught because the regulators are looking at the market and they can see unusual market behavior, and then that alerts them to the fact that there's something fishy going on. Whereas if you can't see the market because it's underground, then you've got no hope of identifying it. And I
Right.
think the other angle, which I think the cricketing authorities, the ECB over here and BCCI, etc., are kind of on top of is just educating players at any professional level about the dangers of match fixing, and what to do if they're approached by a shady character with a suitcase full of money, and how you can be kind of sucked into that world as a low level professional may seem like a attractive, life-changing sum of money. But so I think those education programs are quite important. And I think the other thing is just to kind of, it doesn't make sense to me to have betting on games which aren't played by professional players in regulated leagues. You shouldn't be able to, mu- much as I probably would have a bet on my kids under 11 and under 13 game. It's probably not a good idea.
Right. Now, I think that's a pretty important point because I think the whole, well, firstly, the visibility is a pretty interesting point because that reminded me as you were mentioning the whole aspect of making betting legal. Well, I think there was a game, I want to say maybe last year or maybe 2 years ago, where in the Bangladesh Premier League, so the BPL, where there was one particular over that was just all over the place. There were like so many wides, and I remember Jared Kimber did a piece about that and talked about how there were some irregularities there. Like I don't know if anything came out of that. I can't remember the details, but even a league like that, and to your point, Hansi Cronje, a national South African captain, his counterpart on the Indian side, Mohammad Azharuddin, were involved in match fixing. That happened in the late 90s, but even in the 2010s, we saw international cricketers, three Pakistani international cricketers, being involved in spot fixing. A World Cup winner from India, S. Srishant, be involved in spot fixing with the Rajasthan Royals, and that included even the CSK's owner's son. So the fact that the roots are so deep makes it all the more tricky because the whole franchise system that has been set up, it's not a quick payday for any by any means. Like even for the owners, they are investing millions and millions of dollars or crores of rupees, whatever it might be, um, and they have to really wait to see that paycheck build. So having shortcuts like these to have some sort of soft influence and make quick money is tempting for anyone. So yes, education is important at a young age, but my point is like that corruption can happen even to those who are already
Mm,
privileged and already among the money. And I think we've seen enough examples of that. So I think to your point of making it legal and making it visible is 100% true because then those one-offs will probably stand out more. Um, but I think the other aspect is just regulation around advertising and promoting to communities which are poorer or have economic challenges or under 18 kids and things like that. That is something that has continued to happen across the world, where for example, cigarette brands had in the late 90s and even before that had really done a good job of promoting cigarettes to kids in developing countries because there were lack of regulations, and that led to Indonesia, for example, having a large population of smoking teenagers. And so yeah, just regulations around that is critical. And then the last piece comes in where I feel like the ICC obviously has an anti-corruption unit, but are they just waiting on a player coming up and saying, "Hey, I was approached. Hey, is making sure nobody's using cell phones during a game." Is it just those regulations, or are they actually monitoring these markets? Like that is the question that I am unclear on, but I think that is probably the final step in creating that ethical
mm.
betting structure. Um,
You'd like to think they were monitoring it. I've always assumed that they do, but if they don't, then yeah, that's kind of shocking. So, the same with the stock market. You've got bodies like the SEC that's set up to stop
yeah,
insider training and trading and securities fraud and all the rest of it. And yeah, how they spot it is by looking for unusual transactions and unusual market moves. And I think yeah,
yeah.
that has to be the same for fixing in sport, surely.
Absolutely, but I guess the whole issue though is ICC's run out of the by. They're monitoring the game over all these different, regulatory environments, as we discussed. UK being the more
Mm.
mature one, but others being in different
Yeah.
phases.
And
So
if
I don't
India is
know if
probably the
it's
biggest
easy.
market and all of
Right.
the trades are in the black or the grey market and not visible, then makes that job much harder, right?
Absolutely. I didn't necessarily have any other questions for this particular topic, but yeah, just Benny, I know you've been listening in. Was curious on your thoughts as well in terms of where do you see betting in cricket or betting in general on sports heading, and yeah, just the whole ethical aspect of it versus some companies taking advantages.
I think anytime th there is the prospect of losing money, I'm always a little wary, which is why, like I said earlier, I'm not very familiar with betting. I always just, in my mind, I was always wondering how close or how similar it is to like gambling, like going to a casino and like, trying to get some quick money. So I've always been curious about how betting in general differs from gambling. And in this conversation, I, definitely learned, the nuances to it. But Ben, I am actually curious about for some, you mentioned that you've been doing this for like 20 years, right? And I'm curious about how you would advise someone who is interested in getting into this, but also wary that, okay, this all seems very overwhelming right off the bat. I don't want to get into something that I'm going to look back and see that I've lost a lot of money. But how would you guide someone or advise someone who's interested in getting into this? And yeah, how would you kind of like, what would you suggest? Like, what kind of resources to look at and just get familiar with it?
I mean, I think that the first advice I'd give anyone is never bet with money that you can't afford to lose, which sounds obvious, but it's
Yeah.
that's really important. And then the second one is like you don't have to you don't have to bet straight away and you don't have to bet on everything. So what you can do is you can think, you can start by taking a month or 2 months or a whole IPL or something and think, if I was betting, I would bet this, and then look at the results that you would generate over a month or 2 months and see whether you're any good at it to start with. And
Okay.
if it turns out that you would have lost money, then maybe you need to refine your strategy before you actually play with real money.
Are
Um,
there any resources like, I don't know, either like YouTube channels where people are t talk about this or podcasts or any other websites where people can get insights?
and there's plenty of websites with betting insights, but I think there's a kind of there's an inherent trap in that is that a really important thing in betting is to know who to listen to, and
Hmm.
a lot of these websites are essentially they're either designed to generate traffic and clicks, and they have affiliate links to bookmakers who will pay them for clicks or accounts, or they're just selling their information, stroke tips, stroke analysis. And that's kind of rule number one is don't listen to anyone selling tips because they're always con men. So knowing who to listen to is important, and you can't be an expert in everything yourself, but you can know people who are. And over the years, I've built up a network of friends and acquaintances who are experts in various sports, from in particular types of horse races to US sports like NFL. And it kind of, we share information, and I'm their cricket expert, and they're my experts in those fields. So
Right.
you can build knowledge through trusted sources, but I'd be wary of anybody that's kind of presenting tips at you, if you like, online, because they're often doing it for reasons other than that
Right.
they want you to win money.
Well, not specific tips about specific bets, but just in general to understand how to go about it, you know, getting into the world of sports betting and like understanding how it works. And just like what you talked earlier about, like the skill, there's strategy involved, just understanding that.
Yeah. I think there's no substitute for experience and just doing it, but
Hmm.
just kind of start small. I think, when I was first getting into betting, I was mostly betting on horse racing, and I remember there being two or three really good books that I read that kind of taught you how to do it and the principles behind it. I can't remember what they're called now, but they're probably 20 or 30 years out of date by now. They probably predate online betting. But I'd imagine there are probably good unbiased books that will kind of give you an overview and explain how it all works. But in terms of, yeah, that's explaining how the mechanism of the markets work. But in terms of actually working out what to bet on, there's just no substitute for doing your own research and
Yeah.
just building up your knowledge. It's far better to say you're almost only going to be successful betting on a sport that you know a lot about, that you feel
Right.
like a real expert in.
Yeah, this is a fascinating world, and if you're not too familiar with it, I feel like you can kind of go wrong. So that's why I was just wondering about like if someone is interested, how would they go about getting that information and kind of dipping their toe in the water, so to speak.
Yeah. And
But
if you're
it's
worried about going wrong, then it's probably best to, well, firstly, maybe best to not do it if you're that type of,
yeah,
got an addictive personality, or you're
yes,
worried about whether you might bet more than you think you ought to. I mean, there are kind of tools on the apps where you can, set a deposit limit that says you can only put £50 in a day or whatever to try and kind of self-regulate. But I always feel
yeah.
like if you need to use those tools, then you probably should leave the whole thing alone.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it has served you well over the years. So you're a good endorsement for it, I suppose. So you should probably write something or post videos explaining this in more detail than you've done over the past hour.
Thank you.
Um,
Kind.
but on that note, I think we can wrap it up. And Ben, again, always a pleasure to talk to you on these episodes. Please do come back. It was very informative, and I think for people who are interested to find more information, we might post some links, and you can look it up. I think we got a couple of articles too that you can find in our episode show notes for more information.
Yeah, I
Uh,
do write about betting on my Substack, so
okay.
happy for people to check that out, or just
Yep.
get in touch with any questions. Always happy to speak to
Yep.
people. So
We will link Ben's Substack information, Crickenspo, and yeah, we'll definitely include your handle as well. But Ben, once again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure as always.